This video is an effort to provide a brief introduction to the theory of mastery learning. For more details and references, I encourage you to look at the website. To explain this theory, I like to start with the question, how do you understand differences in aptitude? What's regarded as the traditional view might go something like this. Aptitude determines how much a student will learn given a fixed amount of time and a fixed approach to instruction. What's important here is to examine assumptions about what's fixed and what can vary. So in the traditional view, we assume the amount learned can vary, the amount of time will be fixed, and the method of instruction will be fixed. What if we take a different perspective? What if we assume that aptitude determines how long it will take to learn something, given an optimal approach to instruction? Again, we have things that are fixed and things that vary. In this case, the amount learned is fixed. It's the amount of time that varies. Why does this difference in perspective matter? It matters because learning builds on existing knowledge. So differences in learning speed depend on aptitude differences and existing knowledge differences. If a certain amount of time is allocated, and this amount of time is not enough for some students, the challenge of learning related content and skills in the future becomes greater. Here's how I think about this. Let's say there's a given amount of variability within a group because of aptitude. Let's say it's this much. Now, this variability is going to influence the speed with which these individuals learn, and if they're given a fixed amount of time, they will learn different amounts. Now, at the end of that period of time, and you might think of that as the variability going forward to future learning, you have a situation like this. So you have the existing amount of variability, and an additional amount because of differences in what was learned. Now, if you just kind of extrapolate that unit by unit and grade level by grade level and year by year, kind of maybe based on your existing understanding of compound interest, things just get larger. The variability just increases and increases and increases, which at some point makes it very difficult for these learners to try to go through the same learning experiences. It becomes very difficult for them to maintain motivation, and variability can kind of build on itself over time. Now, this idea of variability, even though we can describe it in terms of aptitude and say background knowledge, is still pretty abstract, and it would be nicer if we had some more concrete way to think about it. Well, there's no perfect way to estimate this, but there have been some attempts. Some of the best, perhaps, have relied upon individualized instructional systems. And what I mean by that is it's a system in which each student kind of proceeds and learns at their own pace, and then you can contrast the amount of time it takes different students to learn a certain amount of content. So some studies with computer-based instruction, for example, provide this opportunity to contrast learning speeds. Just as a rough way of thinking about this, some of these studies have been analyzed in this way, and they've estimated the kind of variability that exists in classrooms, not even with students with, say, extreme learning problems, as somewhere between 3 to 1 and 6 to 1. Now, to put that in maybe an even more concrete way of representation, what we're saying here is that, let's say within a given class period on Monday, you teach something, or the students are asked to learn something. There's going to be students that master that material on Monday, and within a reasonable proportion of an average class, this also argues that some other students are going to take every day for the same amount of time for the entire week to get to the same point. It's hard to know how you'll react to these numbers. maybe it's an interesting way of presenting this and it makes sense to you. Maybe it surprises you. Maybe it terrifies you and you don't really even want to think about it. Um, but it is interesting to kind of see an attempt to establish a variability in some way. And if you are really concerned and would rather ignore this, I would suggest that teachers can't ignore this. And in fact, they don't. Um, if you think about it, there are several. I mean, there's lots of ways that teachers deal with variability, whether they think about mastery learning or not. Um, and I really encourage you to try to come up with a list yourself, but let me get you started. Um, for example, teachers do not um, purposefully gear their instruction to the very brightest and most advanced students in their class. They don't say, well, we're going to go as fast as this kid can go, and everybody else will have to try to keep up. That's just not what they do. They find a middle ground somewhere, and when you do that, of course, then you're allowing a greater proportion of the students to be able to handle the pace of instruction. And there's really a lot of other kinds of approaches that schools use to address variability. Having said that, however, you just think about what that really means. It means that the more capable students are really asked to not learn as much as they could. I don't know if it would be fair to say they're bored or not, but they would have greater capabilities to advance if instruction could be more appropriately geared to their potential. So whether that's good or bad, I don't really think it's productive to get into that. But there is variability there, and we have existing strategies for dealing with it. The whole point of mastery learning is not that you can make all students the same, but there may be ways to at least prevent the variability among students from increasing. Now, going back to some of the earliest comments I made here, what that would mean is variability should not get appreciably more than the variability due to aptitude. So the idea is to not allow knowledge differences to build on aptitude differences. And the idea in mastery is if you don't proceed to new material until students understand old, that maybe will prevent that from happening. Now, of course, researchers try to determine if some of these ideas really work. And so there has been, actually, maybe 20 years ago or so, a considerable amount of research done trying to compare mastery learning approaches with traditional. And as so often is the case in education, you really have mixed results. And so you have some studies showing that these approaches can at least control an increase in variability, and you have other studies showing that doesn't happen. And then you have critics who analyze all this research saying very different things, and it's complex. And so I guess maybe I'll leave it at that and say I've provided some good references on the website if you're really interested in the nuances of this research. Having said all that, if you think about it, and it would make sense if every student could really go at whatever pace they could go at. The more capable students would in fact learn more and would continue to differentiate themselves. And some some researchers, because of the claims made by Mastery, saying, well, that kind of disproves some of this notion of variability. But you can ask yourself, so what's really wrong with that? I mean, maybe a better way to think about it would be, does an educational system allow a student to really do what they're capable of? And if a system forces a student to move ahead too fast, and therefore future learning becomes more difficult because past learning hasn't occurred, you could say that the system then is not allowing the student to do what they're capable of. That's quite different than saying we're going to keep students from becoming more and more different. And so there are a lot of interesting ways of thinking about this. All I'm asking and what I'm trying to get you to do is to think about, there may be some options here. There may be other ways of doing things. And the thing that always interested me about technology, being older and having maybe originally studied this research 20 some years ago, is these are very interesting ideas. They're still interesting ideas to me. I think one of the things was 20 years ago, ways of addressing variability were more limited than they are now. So one of the things, there's so many things technology allows us, but one of the things it may allow us is a way to address variability. And so maybe ideas that were difficult to deal with, good ideas, but ideas that were difficult to deal with 20 years ago, maybe we now have actual opportunities to respond according to some of these notions of how learning actually happens. Something to think about.